Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 32 of our reading of George Orwell's 1984. We've already read the book, but we are reading the afterword by Erich Fromm, I believe. As always, we are going to look at the copyright information. Erich Fromm. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, because I think it's a German name, but I'm not sure. This is a 1961 copy of the book. Says all rights reserved, including the right to reproduce this book or portions thereof in any form. And we've been going over the afterword, and in the last episode, we finished off the section on Newspeak and how it works, which was fascinating. Okay, so now, in spite of all this difference, there is one basic question common to the three negative utopias. The question is a philosophical, anthropological, and psychological one, and perhaps also a religious one. It is, can human nature be changed in such a way that man will forget his longing for freedom, for dignity and integrity, for love? That is to say, can man forget that he is human? Or does human nature have a dynamism that will react to the violation of these basic human needs by attempting to change an inhuman society into a human one? It must be noted that the three authors do not take a simple position of psychological relativism, which is common to so many social scientists today. They do not start out with the assumption that there is no such thing as human nature, that there is no such thing as qualities essential to man, and that man is born as nothing but a blank sheet of paper on which any given society writes its texts. They do assume that man has an intense striving for love, for justice, for truth, for solidarity, and in this respect, they are quite different from the relativists. In fact, they affirm the strength and intensity of these human strivings by the description of the very means they present as being necessary to destroy them. In Zamyatin's We, a brain operation similar to lobotomy is necessary to get rid of human demands of human nature. In Huxley's Brave New World, artificial biological selection and drugs are necessary. And in Orwell's 1984, it is a completely unlimited use of torture and brainwashing. None of the three authors can be accused of the thought that the destruction of the humanity within man is easy, yet all three arrive at the same conclusion, that it is possible with means and techniques which are common knowledge today. In spite of many similarities to Zamyatin's book, Orwell's 1984 makes its own original contribution to the question, how can human nature be changed? I want to speak now about some of the more specific Orwellian concepts. The contribution of Orwell, which is most immediately relevant for the year 1961 and for the next 5 or 15 years, is the connection he makes between the dictatorial society of 1984, the atomic war. Atomic wars had first appeared in as early as the 40s. A large-scale atomic war broke out about 10 years later, and some hundreds of bombs were dropped on industrial centers in European Russia, Western Europe, and North America. After this war, the governments of all countries became convinced that the continuation of the war would mean the end of organized society, and hence of their own power. For these reasons, no more bombs were dropped, and the three existing big power blocks, merely continue to produce atomic bombs and store them up against the decisive opportunity which they all believe will come sooner or later. It remains the aim of the ruling party to discover how to kill several 100 million people in a few seconds without giving warning beforehand. Orwell wrote 1984 before the discovery of thermonuclear weapons, and it was only a historical and it is only a historical footnote, to say that in the 50s, the very aim which was just mentioned has always been reached. The atomic bomb, which was dropped on the Japanese cities, seemed small and ineffective when compared with the mass slaughter which can be achieved by thermonuclear weapons, with the capacity to wipe out 90% or 100% of a country's population within minutes. The importance of Orwell's concept of war lies in a number of very keen observations. First of all, he shows the economic significance of continuous arms production, without which the economy system cannot function. Furthermore, he gives an impressive picture of how society must develop, which is constantly preparing for war, constantly afraid of being attacked, and preparing to find a means of complete annihilation of its opponents. Orwell's picture is so pertinent because it offers a telling argument against the popular idea that we can save freedom and democracy by continuing the arms race and find a stable deterrent. This soothing picture ignores the fact that with increased technical progress, which creates entirely new weapons about every 5 years and will soon permit the development of 100 to 1,000 instead of 10 megaton bombs, the whole society will be forced to live underground, but that the destructive strength of thermonuclear bombs will always remain greater than the depth of the caves, and the military will become dominant. In fact, if not in law, that fright and hatred of a possible aggressor will destroy the basic attitudes of a democratic humanistic society. In other words, the continued arms race, even if it would not lead to the outbreak of a thermonuclear war, would lead to the destruction of any of those qualities of our society which can be called democratic, free, and in the American tradition. Orwell demonstrates the illusion of the assumption that democracy can continue to exist in a world preparing for nuclear war, and he does so imaginatively and brilliantly. Another important aspect of Orwell's description of nature's truth, of the nature of truth, which on the surface is a picture of Stalin's treatment of truth, especially in the 30s, but anyone who sees in Orwell's description only another denunciation of Stalinism is missing an essential element of Orwell's analysis. He is actually talking about the development which is taking place in the Western industrial countries, also only at a slower pace than it is taking place in Russia and China. The basic question which Orwell raises is whether there is any such thing as truth, reality. So the ruling party holds is not external reality. Is not external. Reality exists in the human mind and nowhere else. Whatever the party holds to be truth is truth. If this is so, then by controlling men's minds, the party controls truth. It is a dramatic conversation between the protagonist and the party and the beaten rebel. A conversation which is a worthy analogy to Dostoevsky's conversation between the Inquisitor and Jesus, and basic principles of the party are explained. In contrast to the Inquisitor, however, the leaders of the party do not even pretend that their system is intended to make men happier. To make man happier, rather, because men, being frail and cowardly creatures, want to escape freedom and are unable to face the truth. The leaders are aware of the fact that they themselves have only one aim, and that is power. To them, power is not a means, it is an end. And power means the capacity to inflict unlimited pain and suffering to another human being. Power, then, for them, creates reality. It creates truth. The position which Orwell attributes here to the power elite can be said to be an extreme form of philosophical idealism. But it is more to the point to recognize that the concept of truth and reality which exists in 1984 is an extreme form of pragmatism, in which truth becomes subordinated to the party. An American writer, Alan Harrington, who in Life in the Crystal Palace gives a subtle and penetrating picture of life in big American corporation, has coined an excellent expression for the contemporary concept of truth: mobile truth. If I work for a big corporation which claims that its product is better than that of all competitors, the question whether the claim is justified or not in terms of ascertainable reality becomes irrelevant. What matters is that as long as I serve this particular corporation, that claim becomes my truth, and I decline to examine whether it is an objectively valid truth. In fact, if I change my job and move over to the corporation which was until now my competitor, I shall accept the new truth that its product is the best. And subjectively speaking, this new truth will be as true as the old one. It is one of the most... Okay, we're going to continue this in a little bit, but first of all, we're going to read this. It says, CI, this definition of power by Erich Fromm, Escape from Freedom, New York, Reinhardt and Company, Incorporated, 1941. Also, Simone Weil's definition of the power is in the capacity to transform a living person into a corpse, that is to say, into a thing. Alan Harrington, Life in the Crystal Palace, New York, Alfred A. Knopf, Incorporated, 1959, London. Jonathan Cape, Limited, 1960. Now we're going to reread this sentence here. Speaking the new truth will be... It is one of the most characteristic and destructive developments of our own society that man, becoming more and more of an instrument, transforms reality more and more into something relative to his own interest and functions. Truth is proven by the consensus of millions. To the slogan, "How can millions be wrong?" is added, how can a minority of one be right? Orwell shows quite clearly that in a system in which the concept of truth is an objective judgment concerning reality is abolished. Objective judgment concerning reality is abolished. Anyone who is a minority of one must be convinced that he is insane. In describing the kind of thinking which is dormant in 1984, Orwell has coined the word which has already become part of the modern vocabulary: doublethink. Doublethink means the power to hold two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. The process has to be conscious, or it would not be carried out with sufficient precision. But it also has to be unconscious, or it would bring with it a feeling of falsity and hints of guilt. It is precisely the unconscious aspect of doublethink which will seduce many a reader of 1984 into believing that the method of doublethink is employed by the Russians and the Chinese, while it is something quite foreign to himself. This, however, is an illusion, as a few examples can demonstrate. We in the West speak of the free world, in which we include not only systems like those of the United States and England, which are based on free elections and freedom of expression, but we include also South American dictatorships. At least we did as long as they existed. We also include various forms of dictatorships like those of Franco and Salazar, and those in South Africa, Pakistan, and Abyssinia. While we speak about the free world, we actually mean all those states which are against Russia and China, and not at all, as the words would indicate, states which have political freedom. Another contemporary example of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting them can be found in our discussion about armament. We spend a considerable part of our income and energy in building thermonuclear weapons and close our minds to the fact that they might go off and destroy 1/3 of our, or 1/2, or most of our population, and that of the enemy. Some go even further. Thus, Herman Kahn, one of the most influential writers on atomic energy today, states, in other words, war is horrible. There is no question about it, but so is peace, and it is proper, with the kind of calculations we are making today, to compare the horrors of war and the horror of peace, and see how much worse it is. Kahn assumes that thermonuclear war might mean the destruction of 60 million Americans, and yet he finds that even in such a case, the country will recover rather rapidly and effectively, and that normal and happy lives of the majority of the survivors and their descendants would not be precluded by the tragedy of thermonuclear war. The view holds, A, that we prepare for war in order to preserve peace, B, that even if war breaks out and the Russians kill 1/3 of our population, and we do the same to them, and if we can, of course, more, still, people will live happy lives afterwards. C, that not only war, but also peace is horrible, and it is necessary to examine how much more horrible war is than peace. People who accept this kind of reasoning are called sober. Those who doubt that if 2 million or 60 million died, it would leave America essentially untouched, are not sober. Those who point to the political and psychological and moral consequences of such destruction are called unrealistic. While this is not the place for a lengthy discussion on the problem of disarmament, these examples must be given in order to make the point, which is essentially for the understanding of Orwell's book, namely that doublethink is already with us, and not merely something which will happen in the future and in dictatorships. Another important point in Orwell's discussion is closely related to doublethink, namely it is a successful manipulation of the mind. The person is no longer saying the opposite of what he thinks, but he thinks the opposite of what is true. Thus, for instance, if he were surrounded, if he has surrendered his independence and his integrity completely, if he experiences himself as a thing which belongs either to the state, the party, or the corporation, then 2 + 2 are 5, or slavery is freedom. And he feels free because there is no longer any awareness of the discrepancy between truth and falsehood. Specifically, this applies to ideologies. Just as the inquisitors who tortured their prisoners believed that they acted in the name of Christian love, the party rejects and vilifies every principle for which the socialist movement originally stood, and it chooses to do this in the name of socialism. Its content is reversed to its opposite, and yet people believe that the ideology means what it says. In this respect, Orwell quite obviously refers to the falsification of socialism by Russian communism, but it must be added that the West is also guilty of similar falsification. We present our society as being one of free initiative, individualism, and idealism, when in reality these are mostly words. We are a centralized managerial industrial society of an essentially bureaucratic nature and motivated by a materialism which is only slightly mitigated by truly spiritual or religious concerns. Related to this is other examples of doublethink. Namely, the few writers discussing atomic strategy stumble over the fact that killing from a Christian standpoint is as evil or more evil than being killed. The reader will find many other features of our present Western society in Orwell's description in 1984, provided he can overcome enough of his own doublethink. Certainly, Orwell's picture is exceedingly depressing, especially if one recognizes that, as Orwell himself points out, it is not only a picture of an enemy, but of the whole human race. At the end of the 20th century, one can react to this picture in two ways, either by becoming more hopeless and resigned, or by feeling there is still time, and by responding with greater clarity and greater courage. All three negative utopias make it appear that it is possible to dehumanize man completely and yet for life to go on. One might doubt the correctness of this assumption and think that while it might be possible to destroy the human core of man, one would also, in doing this, destroy the future of mankind. Such men would be so truly inhuman and lacking in vitality, and that they would destroy each other or die out of sheer boredom and anxiety. If the world of 1984 is going to be the dominant form of life on this globe, it will mean a world of madmen, and hence not a viable world. Orwell indicates this very subtly by the point to which the mad gleam in the party leader's eyes. I am sure that neither Orwell nor Huxley or Zamyatin wanted to insist that this world of of insanity is bound to come. On the contrary, it was quite obvious their intention to sound a warning by showing where we are headed unless we succeed in a renaissance of the spirit of humanism and dignity, which is at the very root of Occidental culture. Orwell, as well as the two other authors, is simply implying that the new form of managerial industrialism, in which man builds machines which act like men and develops men who act like machines, is conducive to an era of dehumanization and complete alienation, in which men are transformed into things and become appendices to the process of production and consumption. All three authors imply that this danger exists not only in communism of the Russian or Chinese versions, but that it is a danger inherent in the modern mode of production and organization, and relatively independent of the various ideologies. Orwell, like the authors of the other negative utopias, is not a prophet of disaster. He wants to warn and to awaken us. He still hopes, but in contrast to the writers of the utopias in the earlier phases of Western society, his hope is a desperate one. The hope can be realized only by recognizing, so 1984 teaches us, the danger with which all men are confronted today, the danger of a social or of a society of automatons who will have lost every trace of individuality, of love, of critical thought, and yet who will not be aware of it because of doublethink. Books like Orwell's are powerful warnings, and it would be most unfortunate if the reader smugly interpreted 1984 as another description of Stalinist barbarism, and if he does not see that it means us too. That was by Erich Fromm. It says here the problem is analyzed in detail in Erich Fromm's The Sane Society, New York, and then it gives the information there. Anyways, we have read all of that now. We are done with the book, 1984 by George Orwell. We read the appendix. We also read the afterword. Anyways, if you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.